If you don't pay your accountant, sometimes the IRS collects on their behalf. One of my closest friends runs his own accounting firm. His bread and butter is small and mid-sized businesses, restaurants, bars, local shops. Most of his clients pay on time, keep things straightforward, and he helps them stay out of trouble. But then there was Scott. Scott owned 4 different bars and clubs spread across 2 cities. From the outside, it looked like he was doing well, but from my friend's perspective, Scott was a nightmare. He was shady, slow to pay invoices, and constantly whining about how business was down. Now, I happened to be a regular at one of Scott's bars because they hosted poker nights every Thursday, and every Thursday, without fail, the place was packed wall to wall. So when my buddy started venting over beers one night about a client who owed him thousands of dollars and eventually admitted it was Scott, I was floored. I told him straight up, that's strange, because the bar I go to is booming. He even does this cash discount deal, 15% off your bill if you pay in cash. My buddy stopped mid-sip and just stared at me. Really? Cash discount? He didn't say much more, but I could tell that one little detail had just connected a lot of dots for him. A few weeks later, he called me up and asked if he could tag along to poker night. We went, we played, we lost our money, had some drinks, and afterward, he came back to crash at my place since I lived closer. On the walk home, he finally laid it all out. He suspected Scott was skimming huge amounts of cash off the books. The cash discount wasn't about being customer friendly. It was about funneling payments into a system that was easy to hide. And since my friend was Scott's accountant, he had access to everything. Invoices, payroll, rent, liquor orders, utilities. If Scott was claiming low revenue while buying enormous amounts of alcohol and food, then something wasn't adding up. So he started digging. He went to all 4 of Scott's establishments, mapped out the prices of drinks, tracked specials, and compared it to the amount of alcohol Scott was ordering. He measured labor costs, insurance, rent, utilities, all against the official revenue numbers Scott was feeding him. The conclusion was undeniable. Scott was underreporting his sales by 35% to 40%, recently more, and this wasn't a one-time slip. My buddy realized Scott had been skimming 20% to 25% for years, but lately he'd gotten greedy. To put it in perspective, the man was buying enough alcohol to run 4 full clubs and reporting numbers that barely made sense for one struggling dive bar. My friend told me there was just no mathematical way those numbers could be legitimate. By this point, Scott owed my friend thousands in unpaid fees, enough to buy a brand new motorcycle. But instead of chasing after pennies, my buddy decided to play the long game. He reached out to a lawyer and filed under the IRS whistleblower program. For those who don't know, if you provide evidence that someone is defrauding the IRS, you can receive between 15% and 30% of whatever the IRS manages to recover. And if Scott had been underreporting for years on millions of dollars in revenue, the payout could be massive. So my friend put everything together: receipts, invoices, analysis, projections, and comparisons. Then he officially cut ties and fired Scott as a client. The process took time, lots of legal wrangling, lots of back and forth between lawyers and the IRS, but eventually the hammer came down, and when it came, it was brutal. The IRS determined Scott had underreported roughly $4.5 million in income. His empire of bars and clubs didn't survive the audit. They seized assets, tore through his records, and by the time it was over, Scott no longer owned those businesses. Years of cutting corners and thinking he was smarter than everyone else ended with him losing everything. As for my friend, he's never told me the exact number he got from the whistleblower reward, and since the payout depends on what the IRS actually collects, it's hard to pin down. But the math is simple. 15% to 30% of $4.5 million is anywhere from $675,000 to $1.3 million. When I asked him directly how much he got, he just smiled and said, "Let's just say I don't have a mortgage anymore." And honestly, Scott could have saved himself a fortune if he'd just paid my invoices. And that's the thing. Sometimes greed doesn't just eat into your profits. Sometimes it burns your whole empire down.